back to Doflamingo. Okay, so this is going to be the part 2 of the Doflamingo Royals and Rulers Leaders video that I'm doing about all the different royals and such in One Piece. This one is going to be the second half of the life, to a degree, of Donquixote Doflamingo. In regards to, this is going to be from when he becomes a warlord and then, you know, becomes the king of Dressrosa, and then all the way up into, as far as we are aware, of his current location in the present storyline. Plus a little bit of just like speculation on what might happen from my ideas. So, going into this, where we left off last time was Doflamingo had to, well, in his opinion, had to, was not required, but he did. He killed Rocinante, and basically now Law is off on his own and everything like that. That'll come back to haunt Doflamingo later on. And give him some troubles there. But what ends up happening after that is, you know, Doflamingo doesn't succeed in getting his hands on the Boknomi, so he does not succeed in being able to have the, you know, immortal surgery, perennial use surgery, whatever it's referred to as, depending on the translation. Decides that, moves on to the next part of his plan, which his intention is to then work on becoming a warlord of the sea, because he is aware of the system of the Shishibukai in that regard. And so by that point in time, let's see, this would be 8 years before the storyline, so Crocodile wouldn't have been one at this point in time. I think Boa may have been at this, Hancock may have already been. Hi, are you going to come up and help me? Love you. Hi, Brenda, baby girl. That I think Hancock would have already been a warlord at this point in time. We know that Kuma was not, given what we've learned recently. Moria, possibly. I don't remember exactly where he falls in this regard, but the warlord of this, the Shishibukai system, was at least around at this point in time. In that regard. And what ends up happening is, you know, Doflamingo's like, okay, well, I'm going to work on making myself a Shishibukai, which will give me a fair amount of leeway in regards to what I am allowed to do as a pirate, because it will be somewhat sanctioned by the Marines and the world government. So he starts working on that concept. And part of what ends up happening is he ends up going about and basically ends up deciding that, like, okay, well, the best way to get my way into this is to blackmail and kind of bribe, to a degree, the world nobles into making the, you know, making the Marines make me one of the warlords of the sea, have the world government do that. So what we are aware of what happens is he goes and he basically holds up one of the shipments of the Heavenly Tribute that's on its way to Marijois. And of course, as we've learned about the Heavenly Tribute, that is usually gold, to a degree of varying kinds, you know, money and riches and stuff like that, but it's also like natural resources and food and different things like that. So he basically holds up, you know, maybe more than one of those barges, or those ships that are part of the transport, probably him and like his lieutenants at that point in time, you know, Diamante and Trouble and Pika and that such, you know, using, you know, holding the Heavenly Tribute hostage, and basically says to, well, to the Marines as a whole, but also to the world government and to the Gorosei, are like, hey, you want all of this? You want your celestial dragons to have all of this stuff and everything like that, so they're happy? Make me a Shishibukai. And combined with that and whatever amount of knowledge he has about the celestial dragons and possibly the treasure of Marijois and different things like that, the Gorosei probably decide to give the okay of like, yeah, we'll make you a warlord. It's like, well, we can't exactly give him back his status as a celestial dragon. That kind of went out the window a long time ago. But we will make him a Shishibukai because we can at least keep an eye on him. And then, of course, eventually they end up using that in their favor by using him to, you know, get weapons and stuff like that from Kaido. But I'm just jumping ahead. So he is made a warlord of the sea. After this, he then starts making his way to Dressrosa. And basically what ends up happening is that, 10 years ago, 8 years before the storyline starts, before the series starts, he arrives at Dressrosa one night, and he appears at the window of Riku Joel III, and is like, okay, so here's what it is. My ancestors were the original rulers of Dressrosa. Riku knows this, so he's not like befuddled by this. This is something that he's aware of, because that's probably information that was passed down through the royal family, so he probably learned it from his father and blah blah blah. And Doflamingo is like, so my ancestors were the rightful rulers of this country, and I have this I have this, document that still states that we are the ones that are in control of the country, which is kind of bullshit. All of the celestial dragon families that moved to Marijois gave up any form of status they had as rulers of these kingdoms. Nefeltari family not withstanding from that, because they didn't go there, they didn't leave, they stayed and kept their responsibilities, as opposed to just going to live in luxury for the next 800 years and become horrible inbreeds in that regard. But so Riku unfortunately falls for this, and Doflamingo is like, okay, so what I want you to do is I need you to gather up 10 billion berries from your kingdom by dawn of the next day, and in exchange for that, I will leave your country alone and give you this. If not, I'm just going to attack you with all of my crew and everything like that, since I am a Shishibukai and everything like that, and we're strong and everything like that. And I wouldn't be surprised if Riku had at least been somewhat paying attention to like any exploits of, Donquixote Doflamingo. He would recognize the name, and he would probably have kept an eye on his bounty when it would come out, and any other things like that that he was aware of that were attributed to Doflamingo. And Riku, in an attempt to avoid war, is like, okay, I will agree to your demands. Just give me time to gather the money and everything like that. And Doflamingo puts on the guise of course, go ahead, have your night and into the dawn and everything like that to gather the money. So, as I went over in Riku's video, and I believe I went over this in Viola and Scarlet's videos as well when I was talking about them, Riku basically ends up, pleading to the people and bring out all of your savings and everything like that, and give them to the soldiers that will be coming out to your towns and your villages and everything like that, and bring it all and give it to them, and then they will bring it to the castle, and I will explain later. And everything like that, which he fully has the intention of, having. Riku fully intends to explain to the people the next day about what is going on. I don't think he intends to keep it from the people, but at that moment he does not have the time to explain it to them. And of course, all the people, they start gathering up all of their money and everything like that, and start bringing it to where the soldiers are waiting. And while this is going on, Doflamingo is just watching from behind the scenes, and he's like, okay, well, time to move on to the next part. And he uses his string powers to activate the parasite threads that he has, that he attaches to Riku along with several of a good chunk of his men and such, and then has them start rampaging through one of the cities, and attacking and slaughtering and maiming people and everything like that, and just making it look like Riku has lost it, which admittedly is a decent way of trying to make this work. I mean, it's not a bad strategy in this regard. Make it look like the previous king has lost their minds, and then come in and sweep everything up and make yourself look like the victor and make yourself look like the heroes, which is exactly what his intention is, what Doflamingo's intention is. And what he ends up doing is, of course, they let them, Riku and the rest of the controlled soldiers, slaughter a bunch of people and citizens and everything like that, and attack them and all of that stuff. And of course, it's like the Night of Terror is like what I keep calling it. And eventually what ends up happening is he has his top three subordinates, so Diamante, Pika, and Treble, has them like waiting for the right moment to step in and act as heroes, which is what ends up happening. What ends up happening is, Doflamingo and then the three lieutenants, his, three suits or whatever that he ends up calling them, those three all end up, along with like any of the rest of the family that are there at that point in time, are all like waiting in the wings. And they basically get the signal from their spy on the inside, who is Monette, who has spent the last couple of months or year or whatever, give or take, working undercover at the palace as a maid. And she takes Viola hostage, and then this allows, you know, Monette to literally open up, you know, the gates of the palace to allow Doflamingo and his crew in. So that way they can start taking over and everything like that. And of course, this eventually leads to where, you know, Doflamingo is confronting Viola, and where they have Riku brought in, and where, you know, they have, you know, Doflamingo and Pika, Diamante and Trouble and all of them all act as heroes, as it appears like they show up and they defeat Riku and his army. And, you know, they pass themselves off as heroes in regards to the eyes of the public. And, you know, they end up setting that ground for the takeover. What ends up happening after that is, of course, Riku is held at the palace, and Kyros, you know, goes to the palace, tries to stop him, tries to save Riku, gets turned into the toy soldier, manages to escape with Riku. And, you know, Doflamingo is watching all of this as it happens and everything like that. And he was, you know, his intention was to kill Riku, you know, because it's like, well, I can't turn him into a toy because everyone will forget about him, and that will kind of negate this whole incident. So he doesn't want to use Sugar's power on Riku, which is definitely a wise decision in that case. But what he ends up doing is, of course, you know, Riku gets saved by Kyros, as I went over in Kyros' video and Riku's video. And what ends up happening is, of course, Doflamingo sends Diamante to go and deal with Rebecca and Scarlet, and Scarlet, of course, ends up getting killed, and Rebecca is essentially orphaned to a degree at this point in time, as I will be going over in much more detail in Rebecca's video, which will be the next one. Next one of these. Essentially what ends up happening is, of course, over the next couple of days or so, Doflamingo is, you know, he ascends to the throne, and him and his subordinates and everything else are like all considered like heroes to the people of Dressrosa, because to them, outward appearances, it looks like he manages to, like, him and his crew swept in at the right moment and managed to save the kingdom from their king, who had lost his mind and was, you know, gathering up their money for his own benefit, and then slaughtered so many of them and attacked them and everything like that. So, you know, to the rest of the world, that's what the optics look like, and to a degree on the surface, to the people of Dressrosa, that is what it looks like. So, what ends up happening is, he then claims that it was Riku that made the country poor in the first place, and he promises wealth to the citizens. And in this meantime, he has his subordinates, you know, they hunt down Riku, and Riku, of course, ends up being held at the gladiatorial arena and is basically turned into a gladiator. And eventually, of course, they find Rebecca and end up making her, one of the gladiators as well, and have her jeered at by the crowd and everything like that as sport. But what ends up saving them, as I went over in Viola's video, is that Viola decides that she is going to try to find a way to make herself useful to the Don Quixote pirates, to the family, because if she does that, she can use that as like, well, if I am loyal to you and if I use my devil fruit abilities to be able to help you, then will you please spare my father and my niece? Which Doflamingo makes the deal, and while Rebecca is kept at, the gladiatorial arena and everything like that, she is at least somewhat safe during that time frame. I mean, yeah, she's part of the gladiators and everything like that, but she is, at least to a degree, somewhat safe. And of course, for the next 10 years, Viola plays this very crucial role as a member of the pirates and everything like that. As a member of the family, she uses her ability to track down other people who want to try to cause rebellions and everything like that. Although, and while this does lead to lots of people probably being turned into toys by Sugar, what also ends up happening is, of course, she keeps an eye on Rebecca, So she knows that Rebecca is being taken care of by the Thunder Soldier. She also uses this to keep an eye on the Tontata, and at least probably helps a few times to help people, escape or different things like that. Doesn't tell Doflamingo what's going on with them and different things along those lines. From there, we have it that over the next kind of, to a degree, 8 to 10 years, there's a fair amount of things that happen. One of the things that happens is, Doflamingo continues to use Sugar's Devil Fruit ability, the Hobby no Mi, in order to start, turning so many of the different citizens into toys. And therefore, it becomes very commonplace to have all of these different toys that can talk and walk and have emotions and everything like that all over the city and all over Dressrosa. And it becomes this, land of passion and fantasy and everything like that. And the flip side of that is, well, on the surface, that looks very happy and wonderful and everything like that. On the other side is that this then forces all of these people that have been turned into toys and animals and such like that have been turned into toys, and via the contracts that Sugar makes with them to make them obey the different members of the Donquixote family, that he uses them as slave labor and uses them to work in the port that he built underneath Dressrosa, so that way they can use that for illegal shipping and different things like that. Because even though Doflamingo is, of course, now this, to a degree, legitimate king of Dressrosa, he also is still this warlord of the sea. He is also this pirate. He is also Joker in regards to the, underworld network and everything like that. So he still has all of these, Doflamingo has a lot of different hats that he wears throughout the series. King, former celestial dragon, a-hole, abusive partner, given kind of what's hinted at between him and Viola, things like that. Pirate captain, underworld information broker, different things like that. Weapons smuggler, devil fruit farmer, I don't know, to a degree, that's kind of what happens. But what basically ends up being is, of course, he starts, Dressrosa does start to build up a good amount of money, so on the surface, everything looks fine. And to a degree, the different civilians that are not the toys are not 100% oblivious to what's going on, but they don't know the whole story as to what's going on. And eventually, they do kind of end up figuring out that, okay, something is wrong here, and that Riku, given how good of a king he was not the type that would just go crazy, and there has to be some other thing that happened there. And of course, my own headcanon in that regard is that they figure out that, okay, so Riku is not actually the one that went psycho. Doflamingo did something that night. We don't know what, but he did something that night. And that's why, 10 years later, when we get to more of the present storyline with the Dressrosa arc, we do have it that it's like the people, while they pretend to hate Rebecca and jeer against her and cheer against her and everything like that, jeer at her from the crowd and, boo her and everything like that in the stadium, in actuality, they are doing it as a form of protection, because if Doflamingo knows that they actually do care about Rebecca and they actually don't actually hate the Riku family, that they're still loyal to the Riku family, then, kind of like in Wano, how like the citizens are still loyal to the Kozuki clan, and, in Momonosuke and Odin and Toki and everything like that, and, Sukeyake and all of that stuff, it's just that given the circumstances with Kaido and Orochi there, which I will eventually get to Orochi and Kaido and everything like that in that regard, but in those circumstances, it is the fact that they have to hide it. And in this case, Dressrosa is a very similar aspect of that, where there is Doflamingo and his family are basically kind of, they rule the country, yes, and while they are to a degree, quote unquote, beloved by the people, some of them I think are a little bit more beloved by the people than others. Like, Diamante kind of takes over the Cordia Coliseum, and they have, some of the other family members act as like gladiators in the gladiatorial Coliseum at various points in time, because I know Dellinger does, and I think Pika does at various points in time, and there's a few other points in time that they probably, pop up in the gladiatorial arena. And of course, Senor Pink is very popular amongst the people of the island, and he actually does seem to legitimately care about the people of the island. Yes, he does know that they keep getting turned into toys by Sugar because of Dofi and everything like that, but his loyalty, while to Dofi, he does still care about the citizens of Dressrosa. and everything like that. So, and I think Giola and some of the others do as well, and everything like that. And of course, they bring in more and more people that work underneath the family that have very weird fashion senses in a lot of those situations. And of course, throughout the course of all of this, we do see that the family, the Don Quixote family that are, the pirates, are all very loyal to Dofi, but also very loyal to each other for the most part, which is, kind of interesting. In that regard, they are kind of this definition of, found family, the way that Lilo and Stitch is. I tied the shirt in there. See, I found a way to do it as part of my habit. Not quite as loving as like Lilo and Stitch's family, but like Dofi does care about his family. He cares about those that are around him, and as long as they remain loyal to him and don't disgrace him and everything like that. Case in point, or I guess counterpoint in this regard, or the point that proves the fact, we have Bellamy. So at some point in time, after Dofi has become the king of Dressrosa and everything like that, he ends up interacting with Bellamy and the Bellamy Pirates, and he ends up deciding that, okay, well, you can use my Jolly Roger as long as you don't, bring disgrace to it. That doesn't go well. We way know that does not go well. But so he makes that, deal, alliance, whatever, with with Bellamy and everything like that. I don't remember if we get an exact point in time with that, but it's like stated to be after he becomes king, but it's like before, the main storyline and everything like that, because Bellamy has been loyal to Dofi for like a certain amount of time before he ends up interacting with Luffy for the first time and all of that stuff. But so that meeting happens, and then of course sometime after that he ends up, Dofi, has continued to gain lots of powerful influence within the underworld, and he then decides to start his development of like this three-way alliance between himself, Caesar Clown, and Kaido. And so he starts getting a lot of this information from Caesar Clown, who has set up base somewhere within this time frame, is 4 years or so before the current point in the story, is when Punk Hazard is blown up and by Caesar, and is made pretty much inhabitable because of the experiments and everything like that, or mostly inhabitable. And of course this leads to Vegapunk moves and starts setting up Egghead Island, which we saw very recently in the Kuma flashback. So Caesar ends up setting up his part of dealing with, starting to make the sad that can be turned into the smiles that are used as the, fake, artificial, devil fruits and everything like that are then grown. Well, the sad stuff, I don't remember if we've ever found out what sad stands for, but, Caesar ships that to Dofi, and then in the Smile Factory in Dressrosa is where that sad is kind of planted, whatever, and it grows the smiles, the artificial devil fruits, on the trees there, and where they are being attended to by the Tontara. Because, of course, during everything, he has managed to capture a bunch of the Tontara, and because they are very, very, very naive and exceedingly easily trusting, which loses its charm very quickly and could be fixing of a lot of problems later on, if they stop being so easily coerced. What ends up happening is, of course, they start, he tricks them into saying, oh, these fruits are used to help treat your princess, Princess Moncherie, so that way her, because of her disease and everything like that. Bold-faced lie. They do end up capturing Moncherie at some point in time, and she is held captive, but the smiles go nowhere near her. And of course, the smiles are then shipped off to Wano, to where Kaido is, because of this, setup and everything like that that he has made, that Dofi has made, this alliance that he's made with Kaido, and basically being, the Joker in Kaido's deck of cards based off of his, system and everything like that. And eventually what ends up happening is, of course, this horrible system is set up. And so it's, Caesar makes the sad, it gets shipped to Dofi, gets planted and turned into the Smiles. The Smiles get shipped off to Kaido, and then Kaido then feeds the Smiles to any of the waiters, and they then either become pleasures if for the the 90% chance that the smile does not work, and all you do is just lose your ability to swim and your ability to have any form of emotion beyond or you get the 10% lucky shot of becoming an actual smile user. And then it's kind of a bit of a crapshoot to determine what type of smile you're going to end up being. Some are good, like speed, or some of the other interesting ones that have like a good combination of like how it manifests. Other ones have a horrible ability in regards to how it manifests. But that's for a completely different concept. I have a whole other video where I break down a bunch of the different smile double fruits and everything like that. And like go through and like talk about a bunch of the different ones that we see throughout the course of the story. But so that's kind of what ends up happening there. Dofi also provides lots of funding and cover for, Vegapunk's research by also having Virgo be part of the assistance of this, and of course kidnapping children and using them as experiments for the gigantification process and experiments and everything like that Caesar is currently doing. He also has Monette work as Caesar's kind of assistant / secretary type thing, where she gets turned into a bird woman by law. So a whole bunch of that stuff is going on. So even though Dofi is running this kingdom, he also has his hands in many different pies in this regard, and also still acting as one of the warlords and everything like that. Also through this whole time frame, he ends up murdering all of Baby Five's boyfriends and destroying the towns that they originate from in one way or another. And everything like that, due to wanting to protect her from rash decisions because she isn't able to refuse any requests. So, as I stated before, there is kind of this, like, he does want to protect Baby Five, and I would guess that if anyone ever did come along that actually, like, kind of met Dofi's specifications for what he wouldn't mind as, like, Baby Five's boyfriend / fiance, whatever that would go into, I would assume he would end up eventually being okay with it if someone finally came along that, like, their loyalty was to Dofi and they actually showed that they cared about Baby Five and that it wasn't just trying to get at her for whatever reason. So I would assume there would be something in there that would be a little bit more, he might be a little bit more willing at that point in time, particularly if it would be somewhat beneficial to the family to have this person marry into the family to a degree. Probably not Sai, unfortunately, in that regard, because Sai is kind of like an enemy of the Doflamingo family, of the Donquixote family later on, but, you get the idea that if someone came along that Dofi approved of, he might be willing to let Baby Five actually marry the person, but that's not the case here. But he also kind of uses that against her in the fact that, like, he will basically manipulate her similarly to how, the boyfriends want to manipulate her, but Dofi actually, to a degree, generally cares about her, as do a good chunk of the rest of the family. Also, Treble is very creepy and hits on her a lot. So that's what happens there. Then we get to the point to about sometime a little while before the beginning of the actual storyline we have, of course, that we saw very recently in the manga, where, Kuma's flashback, where he is announced as the, new member of the Shishibukai, of the replacement warlord and everything like that, Bartholomew Kuma and everything, and we see Sugar showing this to Dofi, and Dofi's just like, this is interesting. They have this title, this tyrant coming in here and everything like that, and with that, and, Crocodile trying to do whatever he's trying to do in Alabasta and everything like that, this might be interesting. So Dofi's just kind of like finding entertainment in that. And then, of course, 2 years ago, when everything happened in Dressrosa, Dofi just finds this hilarious when Crocodile gets defeated by Luffy. Give it about 2 years. You're going to be defeated by the same rubber boy. So, yeah. As this happens a lot. Crocodile's defeat leads into where we actually get to finally meet Dofi for the first time. Also, in regards to him reading about Luffy in the newspaper and him kind of being smart enough to put 2 and 2 together that, Luffy's bounty went up after what happened in Alabasta, and Crocodile got defeated, so Luffy probably did that. He's also shocked by the fact that Luffy is a D, has the will of D in his name, because Dofi, as I mentioned in the previous video, would have been, of course, raised with like the concept of like anyone that has like the will of D is kind of like this boogeyman for the celestial dragons type of a thing. And all of that stuff. Bear in mind, he has no idea that Law is also a member of the D clan, because Law never told him. Law told Baby Five and Treble, or Buffalo, but they never told Dofi. And then, of course, Roshinante heard this, and that's why he took Law away and everything like that, and tried to find Law a cure. And, of course, this leads into the Jaya arc, where we actually get our first canonical moment where we get to see Doflamingo for the first time, where he's first introduced. And he is, of course, introduced alongside Kuma, and then, of course, we're reintroduced to Mihawk during this time frame, because it's this meeting of the warlords. Because, you know, it's like, okay, well, Crocodile has been defeated, so we need to find a replacement for Crocodile. Who do we think is going to be this person? So we see Kuma showing up, and we see Crocodile showing up, and then, of course, eventually, you know, Mihawk shows up. We also see Doflamingo just taking great, you know, having fun with the fact that he keeps... I think he like uses his string at one point in time to just manipulate one of the some of the different vice admirals or whatever that are there as part of the meeting to like fight each other and everything like that, which just causes Suru, Vice Admiral Suru, to basically scold him the way that like a grandmother would scold a grandchild. And I know that there's lots of different artwork out there of like Dofi and Suru. Just like being like grandmother and grandson set up, or like where she's kind of trying to take care of him, or different things like that, which are adorable. Not canon, but adorable. But that can be described about a lot of One Piece art. It's like, oh, this is adorable, but it's not canon. I'm aware of that. It's still cute. Go away. So Dofi's just, we get to see kind of Dofi's personality coming out at this point in time. And of course, during this time frame with Jaya, we are, of course, since this lines up with the Jaya arc, this is, of course, where we also find out about Dofi in regards to his connection to Bellamy. So we're kind of getting those two sides of that story. And it's either we are introduced to Dofi first, and then we meet Bellamy, or it's we're introduced to Bellamy first, and then we see Dofi. I'm not exactly sure which is which, but like within that time frame is what happened. So it's like within like that same Jaya arc setup that they're both introduced, and like it's the concept and then the person, or the person and then the concept, depending on how that goes out. So eventually what ends up happening is during the meeting is, of course, when, you know, Lafitte manages to show up. Bear in mind, they're having this meeting at Marijois, so Dofi gets lots of opportunities to go to Marijois. Also, given the fact that he is the king of Dressrosa, he has probably been to Marijois multiple times during the different reveries that would have happened during that time frame, because we know that the current storyline lines up with a reverie happening that just happened. So then 4 years previously, Dofi would have been the king, and he would have been at the reverie. And then 4 years previous to that, so 8 years ago from the current storyline, he would have been at the reverie. And then 4 years prior to that would have been 12 years ago. So he wouldn't have been at that reverie. That still would have been Riku at that reverie. But like, so Dofi's been at the reverie twice. Or at the very least, Dressrosa would have probably sent representatives to the reverie twice during the time frame that Dofi was the king. He probably just decided to, you know, go himself and see, you know, just have fun there or whatever. Probably brought various family members with him and had fun with that and everything along those lines. But, you know, so there's that. Also, Dofi would not have passed up an opportunity, I don't believe, to be allowed to go to Marijois and then possibly have one of his string clones, depending on how quickly he managed to develop that technique, have one of his string clones at the meeting, and then he himself just goes off and just causes trouble, or just goes and tries to find his way through the castle and stuff like that, and finds information while he's in the castle. Because it's just like, if I was given that opportunity, it's very similar to what we see Robin do in Wano when she's like at Orochi's party at the castle, and she like has her clone go off and look for information, and then the clone gets attacked, and then Robin is fine. So there's like this there's like this similarity there where it's just like, well, if you can pull that off, why not do it? So that just seems like something that Dofi would probably have done, and probably use that to then gain information. And he probably would have had other various meetings where he may have gone and maybe crashed a meeting of the Gordo, for all we know. Probably didn't try to crash a meeting with Eam, but Dofi knowing about Eam would make perfect sense. And I think most people assume he knows about Eam, or at least most of us fans assume that he knows about Eam. So during this time frame at Marige, while they're having this little meeting of the warlords to discuss the crocodile issue, is when Lafitte shows up, and he's like, "Oh, well, why don't you make Teach or Blackbeard the new warlord of the sea? He's got some good credentials," and blah 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 blah. So that does eventually result in Blackbeard is made the new warlord. Admittedly, this is he manages to bring in Ace and everything like that, so that's kind of where that happens. But eventually what ends up happening is, of course, then we have the moment where we kind of start to see a little bit more of Dofi's personality when you're watching this in order in the anime and reading it in the manga, where Dofi makes his way to Mocktown, where he has Bellamy and Sarkis battle each other, because Bellamy, of course, lost to Luffy in one punch, and dishonored Dofi's flag in that regard of letting Bellamy use it and call himself a member of be in an alliance with Dofi's name. He brought dishonor to Dofi's name. So Dofi goes there and just has fun and makes Bellamy and Sarkis and forces them to fight each other. This, of course, he just uses this as just like a fun little way to probably blow off steam and blah 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 blah. And eventually this does lead to Bellamy ends up begging for forgiveness, and he just stated fine, but you are never to use our name again, and you're never to bring shame to the flag again, and everything like that in regards to the Donquixote family flag, in regards to the pirate flag and all of that stuff. Dofi's Jolly Roger. So he goes through all of that. He also ends up having Sarkis attack Bellamy, but from what we see later, Bellamy survives and everything like that. And of course, he just ends up, finding all of this hilarious, and he's, because Dofi is just let's cause chaos and see what else happens. That is very much how he tends to operate. And that's what he's very good at. He causes chaos and is let's see what happens. So that's what he does there. The next time we see him is during the Sabaody archipelago, because he ends up getting a call from Disco, who is the guy that runs the human auction house in Sabaody, where they are attempting to auction off Kami. And I hate this scene. Well, one part of the scene I love, and that's when Charlos gets punched, but just don't like the thing in general. But what ends up happening is, of course, Disco calls Dofi and is trying to explain what happened and trying to come up with a reason for why he allowed the auction house to be attacked by the Straw Hats and everything like that. And Dofi just kind of is laughing at this point in time, and he's just slaves are out, smiles are in. So at least 2 years ago they would have had the Smile Fruits up and running, and maybe a bit prior to that, and that's why he's so interested in that. So Dofi doesn't really care about the auction house. He just tells it's go ahead and keep the auction house and never call me again. So that's where Dofi's answer ends there. And of course, leading up into this is, of course, when Dofi and the other warlords are preparing for what will happen for the Battle of Marineford. So Dofi is on his way to Marineford, so that way he's there, and of course they have this meeting with the warlords and everything like that there. Also, we know at some point during all of this time frame, either at some point between when he became a warlord and when he is no longer a warlord, we know that Vegapunk manages to get his hands on some of Dofi's genetics. Now, on his lineage factor. Now, whether or not this is something that Dofi willingly gave them, or whether it's something that at the different meetings of the warlords and whatnot, and even at the Reverie, they went through and managed to get genetic material from them, hair, saliva, whatever, and then they had the Marines mark that down and then give it to Vegapunk, and then Vegapunk used that to then make the Seraphim that are all the clones of the 7 original warlords. So we know that that eventually happens somewhere in this time frame, but also it's like, so yeah, we know that Dofi gets captured later on because he ends up in Impel Down after he's defeated by Luffy, but like that was literally within like a couple of weeks of when, you know, everything would have happened between the end of Dressrosa and, you know, the beginning of Egghead. So they would not have had the Seraphim ready within that time frame. So sometime before that is when Vegapunk gets his hands on Dofi and the rest of the warlords' lineage factors. So then we get into Amazon Lily, where of course Dofi and the rest of them, he's not really involved in Amazon Lily too much beyond, you know, at the end of that arc is when of course they're all expected to arrive at, you know, Marijois, so that way all the warlords can dine together. So we see Dofi and Kuma and Mihawk and Blackbeard and Moria are all there chowing down and everything like that before the battle. Jinbei and Hancock are the exceptions to this rule. Are the exceptions to this because Jinbei is in Impel Down at that point in time and Hancock is being Hancock. So then eventually we do get to the Marineford War, Marineford Arc, Battle of the Best, Paramount War, whatever you want to refer to it as. We get to that, and during this time frame, this is where we have Dofi do his big speech during this time frame, during the battle and everything like that about, you know, pirates are good, pirates are bad, Marines are good, blah, 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 blah. Where he gives that big speech and everything like that. And of course, he's there with all the rest of the warlords, minus Blackbeard at this point in time, because Hancock has shown up and Blackbeard has gone off to do his own thing. That they're all there along with all of these Pacifista and all of these other Marines and everything like that, all ready to fight against, you know, the Whitebeard pirates when they show up, which of course just leads into this, you know, amazing battle and everything like that that has some heart-wrenching moments throughout the entire thing. And of course he's very interested in this. He fights against you know, Ors Jr. and cuts off his, you know, leg, and then of course he ends up, you know, dealing with a whole bunch of other members of the different Whitebeard pirates and everything like that. And of course eventually when Luffy and the rest of the prisoners from Impel Down that managed to escape, you know, Ivankov and Crocodile and, you know, Jinbei and all of them, and Buggy and all that stuff, when they show up, this is of course where we have the moment that it's like Dofi has the ability to basically explain to Ivankov that Kuma has basically been turned into this mindless pacifista. So I do have questions about this. So Dofi apparently knows about a bunch of the stuff that happens with Kuma in regards to the fact that he's getting turned into this weapon. I would assume this is something that has been explained to some of the other warlords at this point in time, because I don't know how Dofi would have been getting that information. I mean, I guess by technicality he could have been getting it from York, but I don't know where York would have been in this situation, how far into development of things York would have been. So I'm not sure on that, but so Dofi gets to be the one that gets to make that revelation to Ivankov, unfortunately, which is just heart-wrenching for Ivankov, and even more heart-wrenching, you know, later on when we get more of the circumstances. He also is very amused by Luffy, this famous rookie that is fighting through, you know, all of these Marines and warlords in order to try to save, you know, in order to try to save his brother, and all of that stuff. So we have a whole bunch of that stuff. And like, so a bunch of that stuff is happening during the battle. He fights against Jozu from the Whitebeard pirates, and he ends up, you know, clashing with Crocodile at one point in time. And he also ends up like trying to like tell Crocodile, hey, you know, why don't you come and work with me, and we can, you know, you can just become one of my subordinates and everything like that, which Crocodile does not want. Although now he is a subordinate to a clown in the eyes of the world. So which one seems less demeaning, clown or flamingo? By the way, I'm pretty sure that if the warlord system had been abolished while Dofi was still a warlord and still like with, you know, still had his whole crew and everything like that, Buggy may not have ended up being the one becoming the next warlord. It probably would have been Dofi, given the context of things. given that Dofi probably poses much more of a threat to the world government in that regard than Buggy did at that time. But Buggy's the warlord, or Buggy's the one that becomes the the Emperor of the Sea later on. But so Dofi is watching as all of this stuff is happening. He finds it very entertaining to him, which is, I guess, reasonable. So there's a bunch of that stuff that happens. It's also between him and the pacifistas that they end up attacking Moria and try to take Moria out, and everything like that. And then, of course, eventually this does lead into the post-time skip. Or into the time skip and then into the post-time skip. So there's not too much else that we get. Eventually we know that, of course, Dofi is amused and everything like that. When he gets, scolded by the world's government for causing so much property damage and everything like that at Marineford, but Dofi doesn't care. And then, of course, he eventually goes off and just returns back to Dressrosa and everything like that. Then, of course, we have during the time skip, he manages to get his hands on the Maramarinomi. And during the time skip is, of course, when Bellamy manages to show back up, have the giant gold pillar from Skypiea that I still have no idea how he managed to get down to the Blue Sea, but he managed it somehow. He takes that to Dressrosa, gives it to Dofi, and Dofi's just like, okay, well, you brought me a giant pillar of gold. Still not sure how you got it here. But I guess I forgive you, or at the very least, you get a second chance. So that's what happens there. We still never get any context about how Bellamy managed to get that thing down from Skypiea, given the fact that it seemed like most of his crew died in the process of getting up there in the first place. So that happens. And I just had the thought of, this is already a 40-some minute video. I could just turn this into a 3-parter thing about Doflamingo. But I'm not going to, so I'm going to keep going. So eventually then we lead into the post-time skip. So Dofi is not involved with the return to Sabaody, and he is not involved with, them being at Fishman Island. So there's not really much there. Then we get into Punk Hazard. So during Punk Hazard, we are, of course, reintroduced to Smoker and to Shiki and everything like that. We're introduced to Caesar, and we're introduced to Virgo, who we, of course, find out later on is a member of the Doflamingo, of the Donquixote Pirates, and, of course, is undercover in the Marines as a spy. While everything is happening, we end up getting this moment where Caesar, I believe, calls Doflamingo and is trying to explain what's going on, or Virgo is communicating with Dofi about what's going on, about the SAD and everything like that. And, he's kind of telling him that, well, law is here, so, I don't know exactly what you want me to do about that. And we have this moment where we see Dofi just lounging on this, what honestly looks like a very fuzzy couch, and then he's got Sugar next to him who's eating all of her stuff, and we're getting glimpses of a bunch of these different members of the Donquixote Pirates and everything like that, as Dofi is just like sitting and relaxing in Dressrosa. And of course, while he's on this, having this conversation with, Virgo over the phone, or over the snail, I should say, he ends up having this kind of confrontation with Baby Five, who is attempting to, assaulting Doflamingo and everything like that because he killed another one of her boyfriends or fiancés. And, so he's just dodging the attacks and just being very calm, or using his, armament hockey to deflect the attacks and everything like that as Baby Five is attacking him. So not really, he's not really all that worried about any of this stuff at that point in time. Eventually this ends up resulting in, of course, he's threatening Caesar over the phone, or over the snail and all of that stuff. And there's not too much else that he's involved in for a good chunk of the thing. We have the moment where he gets called. Well, first he sends Baby Five and Buffalo to go and fly over to Punk Hazard, and they're supposed to go there and deal with Caesar and then get Monette and then bring Monette home, basically. And, Virgo if possible. So all that stuff. Eventually, he does end up learning that Virgo was defeated, which does not make Dofi happy because, Virgo has been this member of the family for a very long time, and he respects Virgo and everything like that, and to a degree cares about Virgo as much as Dofi can care about people. So we have all of that happen. Then we get into where you know, he kind of listens to, I think he hears part of the battle between Law and Virgo and everything like that. And of course, I think Law does manage to communicate with Dofi during parts of this battle. And there's not really too much else that Dofi is involved in here, but he does hear a bunch of what's going on over the snail. And eventually part of the thing that this results in is, of course, he tells Monette that, okay, what I need you to do is I need you to go and I need you to blow up the island, because Virgo's dead and I don't need any evidence of this connecting back to me, or Virgo was defeated, and I don't need any evidence of the Sad and Caesar connecting back to me. So he sends Monette in, and of course Monette is ready to blow herself up with everything else in this regard. So we get that whole scene where she gets stabbed by Caesar in the heart that he thinks is smokers from outside of her body, and she dies in one room before she can blow everything up. So that happens there. Fun bit there. The next bit that we get with him is, of course, kind of just going into the post-Punk Hazard arc where you know, he shows up to where Baby 5 and Buffalo are. Well, I mean, you know, where their heads are on a raft. And he's, you know, very angry with Law at this point in time because, like, Law has hurt 2 of his crewmates that are former crewmates of Law. So there's some of that, you know, layered on top of that there, I guess, given, you know, Dofi's version of a pirate code. I mean, he has one. I don't know exactly what the you know, what the stipulations are of Dofi's pirate code, but he has one. And he's very angry about this, and he's like talking to, you know, Law over the Dendenmushi, and Law is like making the demands of like, what I want you to do is I want you to resign as a member of the Shishibukai and everything else, and blah 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 blah. These are the demands that I want, and if you meet them, you can have Caesar back. Dofi is not happy about this by any means, and he basically ends up, you know, he saves Baby 5 and Buffalo and gets them their bodies back and everything like that eventually. But Dofi is well aware of this is aware of the fact that should he fail with Kaido will get very angry and possibly come and, you know, attack Dressrosa and at the very least get rid of Dofi. Because as strong as Dofi is, and to a degree as much of a fight as he could probably put up against Kaido can still very much easily defeat Dofi, given everything we've seen. Because it's not like Dofi's parasite threads would be able to do much against Kaido, and all of that stuff, so that wouldn't cause much problem there for Kaido anyway. So we know about that, and eventually we have it that the next big moment that happens is, of course, Dofi arrives at Punk Hazard after the Straw Hats and Law have left, and he ends up confronting Smoker, where they end up fighting, and he's about ready to put Smoker down when Aokiji shows up, freezes Dofi, or partially freezes Dofi to the point where he can't, you know, where he's able to save Smoker and everything like that. And so we have all of that happening. And you know, Dofi, I'm surprised that's the first time I've made that mistake in this video. Dofi manages to, of course, break free from the ice, but he still, you know, decides to leave because he doesn't want to deal with Kuzan and all of that stuff. And he manages, you know, he goes back and he, you know, gets Baby 5 and Buffalo their bodies back, and then they head back to Dressrosa, where the next morning in the papers it is stated that you know, Donquixote Doflamingo has given up his position as the member of the warlord, and he is advocating his position as the monarch of Dressrosa and everything like that. So, you know, we have that moment. Well, that's going on, and all around the world, everybody's like, oh my god, what? So, like, that's all happening. And then, of course, we go into the Dressrosa arc, which, well, is technically a recent arc, is still like 10 years ago, in regards to chronologically when we would have been reading it. So basically going through the Dressrosa arc, and I'm going to speed blitz the Dressrosa arc. to a degree in regards to what's going on with Dofi. So Dofi has all of these different traps set up. He's got the Maramaranomi competition set up at the Cordia Coliseum that is designed as a trap to lure in Luffy. He then goes and is trying to get Caesar from Law and Robin and Usopp that are on their way to Green Bay. That is just north of Dressrosa. So all of that's happening at the same time. He's also basically using the Coliseum tournament to keep an eye on where Luffy is, because he knows Luffy will not be able to resist, and rightfully so, not resist the chance to try to get a hold of Ace's Devil Fruit. This kind of like last possible remnant of his brother. So that's all headed off that way. Dofi then, of course, goes and has this confrontation to a degree with Law. Dofi is not alone, however, because he actually has has Admiral Fujitora, or Isho there, and Isho / Fujitora, I'm gonna go back and forth on his name, does not like Dofi by any means. He does not agree with any of the stuff that Dofi has done in regards to how he took over the country and everything like that. He does not agree with that, but he is, has to work with Dofi, because even though via the papers it appears that Dofi has, abdicated and resigned, he has not. And so we get this big fight between Dofi and Fujitora against Law. And this basically results in, so we get like good displays of like what Dofi and Fujitora are capable of. We've seen Dofi do various things in regards to him fighting, the little bits we saw him do, and in Mocktown, and then like a bit more of a taste of what he could do at Marineford. But now with this moment, we're kind of getting a much better idea of what Dofi is capable of, with him fighting against Law. And of course, eventually it is revealed, Law makes the announcement that no, I am in an actual alliance with Luffy and everything like that. So this eventually leads to where Dofi and Law, through their fighting, end up landing in like the middle of the street right outside the Cordia Coliseum, and Dofi shoots Law several times. I don't know if it's actually the same gun, but I think it's the same gun that he uses against Roshinate, but I don't remember if that's the case or not. But he shoots Law multiple times with Sea Prism bullets, I believe, or at the very least with regular bullets, and then captures Law and takes him back to the castle on the King's Plateau in Dressrosa. Dofi then goes off and goes to attack the Sunny, where Nami, Robin, Chopper, and Momonosuke are. Shows up there, tries to attack them. Sanji manages to show up at the last second and manages to hold Dofi off enough that Nami and the others can start getting away, and then Sanji manages to escape as well, gets kind of injured in his fight with Dofi, but he at least holds his own for long enough to allow Nami and the others to escape, and then he heads off and goes back to the Sunny, and then Dofi is like, okay, fine, I couldn't take care of them. Fine, I'll head back and deal with the captain. Take care of the captain and the rest of that part of the crew. That part's not really all that much of a threat to me anyway. It's technically not wrong. In that regard. But then Dofi heads back, and of course we have all of these moments where, he's talking with Law and trying to convince Law to just, come on, join the family again. You can have the seat of the heart seat, you can have Corazon's seat, and all of that stuff. You were going to be raised to take it anyway, because I saw potential in you, blah, 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 blah. And this is where, of course, we're getting all of the backstory and all of that stuff between Law and Dofi and Roshinate and all of this stuff. Is happening during all of this stuff. And of course, everything's happening with the tournament, and Dofi's keeping an eye on that. And of course, at some point during this time frame, Sabo and Luffy swap, so he doesn't know that Luffy's actually out running around. And of course, during this time frame, it was, of course, when Viola, kind of betrays the family and starts helping, Luffy and his crew and Sanji and all of that stuff. So that's, all of this kind of stuff is all happening around similar time frames. And eventually what ends up happening, Dofi has these moments where where him and Law are confronting each other, while Law is strapped to the chair with the Sea Prism Stone cuffs and everything like that, and bleeding because he's been shot multiple times and has not been able to, address the wounds inside of him. So that's all happening. And of course, Dofi is just like, come on, Law, join the family, blah, 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 blah. Give me the immortal surgery and all of that stuff. And Law's like, well, why would I do that? It's just like, I'm going to die if I do that. I already know the rules of that part of the surgery. So that's all happening. During this time frame, of course, Frankie is trying to get into the toy house and eventually find his way to the Smile Factory and causing all of havoc that way, and of course dealing with the Tontata. So many of these different things are happening at the same time. And then we have this moment where Fujitora and Doflamingo kind of clash with each other a little bit, because this is where it's, Fujitora is like, the only reason I am here is because I am told to be here by the Marines. Admiral Akainu, Sakazuki sent me here to deal with you. But I really don't like having to work with you, basically, is what ends up being the result of this conversation. And, Dofi is just like, well, you have to, because those are your orders, and I'm the one that's still a member of the world government, and not this pirate. In regards to Law, since he did kind of abdicate his position as a member of the Shishibukai. Also, there's the second round of papers that come out that proclaim that no, Dofi didn't actually resign, and blah, 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 blah. And of course, the citizens of Dressrosa were like, they were like in a panic at the beginning of the day, and like, they were told by Dofi, they put on the guise of like, no, Dofi, King Doflamingo, you can't do this. We love you as our king. And he's like, just act normal. This is all a ruse. Don't worry about it. I'm not actually abdicating. And their minds are just like, please make him leave. Please make him leave. Please make him leave. And of course, the toys are just like, please make him leave. They knock out the girl with the grape concept or whatever like that. Knock out the girl with the toy powers. We can all go back to being human again. Cue human again from Beauty and the Beast. Because my brain. So eventually there's like all this other stuff that's happening, and eventually there ends up resulting in, one of the climaxes, not the climax of the battle, but part of the climax of this. It kind of leads into the whole battle system that ends up happening, the whole battling that happens throughout the course of the rest of the arc is, of course, Sugar gets knocked out by Usopp, and this, of course, leads to everybody that has been turned into a toy all over the kingdom turning back into their human selves, and everybody who had lost their memories of said people being turned into toys all gain their memories back. So during that time frame and all of that confusion is going on, Kyros changes from the Thunder Soldier back into Kyros, manages to jump into the kind of main room of the castle area, or the room of the castle where Dofi and the others are holding Law, jumps in, decapitates what they believe is Dofi, and then, Luffy and Viola are working on trying to get, Law out of the cuffs. This doesn't go well. So basically what ends up happening is, of course, the Dofi that was beheaded, as I've gone over several times already, is just a clone duplicate. It's one of the string clones of Dofi. As I stated, I don't know if we know what the upper limit of how many string clones Dofi would be able to make of himself, but I would assume we see him make 2 of himself throughout the course of the arc. He makes this first one, and then he uses this one to then form the bird cage. And then he makes another one that ends up fighting Luffy later in regards to what's going on with Bellamy, which I'll get to. So what ends up happening is, of course, this one of Dofi is revealed to be a string clone, and then, of course, Luffy and his group get knocked out of the castle along with the key that they need to get to free Law, which, of course, Viola eventually finds, and then, of course, Dofi ends up setting up his his star game and everything like that, where they have all of the, Rebecca and Robin and Kinemon and, Viola and Frankie and Kyros and Zoro and Sabo and Riku and Law and Luffy and Usopp. All of them have the different stars and everything like that, and have the bounties on their heads and all of that stuff. So And then he proclaims to the kingdom, whoever brings me them will be spared and will get the bounty, or whatever. So bring me them and everything will go back to normal, or you're all going to die anyway because of the birdcage. So that's his intention. And of course, so he uses the string clone to start forming the birdcage all around the island, which effectively cuts off communication to anything outside of the island. It does not cut off communication within the island because they're still able to use Dendenmushi to communicate with each other to a degree as to what's going on, but they cannot communicate with anything that is outside of the island. So I don't know exactly how Dofi manages to pull that off, but he does. And then, of course, Dofi starts slowly moving the strings for the birdcage closer and closer in. He also uses his power to set up the parasite thread ability again, although this one on a much wider scale, where he is attacking, uses it to attack to the Marines that are on the island, attached to the Marines that are on the island, and attached to a bunch of the civilians that are on the island, and make them all start fighting each other and attacking the other civilians. So that way there's even more chaos going on. And so the Marines have to then try to fight not only other Marines, but also civilians and try not to hurt them and everything like that. He does try to use the parasite thread on Fujitora, but Fujitora just manages to catch it and crush it. And is like, well, that's not affecting me now, but this is affecting everybody else, so we got to deal with that. So, and of course, during this time frame, Fujitora is just like, okay, I'm not going to work with the weird, flamboyant, boa-wearing psychopath anymore. We're going to work on protecting the citizens of the island. So that's what Fujitora focuses on for the most part. He does have some clashes with Sabo and some clashes with Zoro throughout this time frame, but for the most part, he's focusing on trying to stop the birdcage and stop and deal with the people who are being affected by the parasite threat. So that's what's happening there. Dofi, of course, is using his, causing all of this to happen, and eventually this does lead into where he has the battle where he does start fighting against Luffy and Law for the first part. Well, there's kind of two things that happen, and I don't remember exactly what order they happen in, but it's like, first of all, Luffy and the others have to try to get Law's handcuffs off, so they need to get the key, but stuff keeps happening and Luffy ends up running around with Law on the back of Ushi, on the back of the bull, for like a while and everything like that, and they end up just causing a whole bunch, causing problems that way while they're running into a bunch of the other gladiators that are trying to help Luffy. And they're also being chased around by the clone Doflamingo, so that's happening there, one of the clone Doflamingos. And of course there's a bunch of this stuff that keeps happening there, and eventually there does result in the moment where Luffy, of course, manages to, there ends up being a battle, of course, where Luffy and Law are fighting against Dofi, where we kind of get the start of this battle, and Luffy does manage to land a very, very hard-hitting attack of Red Hawk against Dofi, which does cause some damage to Dofi. It obviously doesn't take him out, but it causes some damage to Dofi. And of course, during this time frame, Dofi has also been using Bellamy to try to mess with Luffy more. He tried to get Bellamy to try to kill Luffy and everything like that. He's, of course, very determined to, just like make Bellamy suffer for, his disappointments over, Bellamy's failure and all of that stuff. So we see a bunch of that happening throughout this part of the arc. And of course, there does lead into the point where, Dofi forces Luffy to fight Bellamy by using part of the parasite thread on Bellamy and all of that stuff. And of course, eventually Luffy manages to punch out Bellamy again. Not that it's necessarily that hard. Luffy just doesn't want to hurt Bellamy because of everything else. And eventually, of course, there's all the moments where, like, Law is trying to fight against Dofi and Treble at the same time. And, of course, so many different things are happening there. And eventually, of course, Dofi reveals to Law that he is a former, his status as a former Celestial Dragon, which befuddles Law and all of that stuff. So we have that kind of happening. And, of course, there's, that's actually shock to Luffy, Law, and Bellamy, that moment happens. And he's also, Dofi is just like, and I just want to use, all this I just want to cause chaos and destruction all over the world. So that's what I want to do. So, all of that's happening and all of that stuff. And of course, eventually what ends up happening is, of course, we finally get to the point where, we have the battles that start happening between Luffy and Dofi. And where, Law manages eventually to defeat Treble by using his own severed arm, which is just really disturbing. And so all of that's happening. And then, of course, Luffy is fighting against Dofi and using his Bounce Man form. And we have, of course, the moment where Luffy and Dofi have their Conqueror's Hockey Clash when Luffy manages to save Law from being, impaled by Dofi. So we have that moment. That leads into Luffy using Bounce Man and fighting against Doflamingo using that. And there's like so many, the battle lasts a very long time and it jumps around all over the island. And, eventually Luffy gets knocked out of fourth gear and he ends up, of course, he has to wait like the 10 minutes. And during those 10-minute time frame is where Luffy and Luffy has the gladiators helping him, and basically he ends up having it be that the bunch of the gladiators keep getting in between Luffy and Dofi, so that way Luffy can get his 10 minutes of rest in, so that way he can then be back at his full power in gear 4th and manage to defeat Dofi. And of course, so that's part of what's happening. So Luffy keeps getting carried all over the island and everything like that. And eventually we have the moment where that I went over in the Viola video, and I'll go over again in the Rebecca video, where Viola finally manages to stand up to Dofi. Luffy had done a good amount of damage to Dofi at this point in time. Same thing with Law. Law had managed to do a lot of damage to Dofi in regards to internal damage, but Dofi is just really strong. And has a lot of battle experience and all of that stuff. So a bunch of that stuff's happening. And so what ends up happening is, of course, we have the moment where Viola shows up and she is confronting Dofi. And she's like, you have caused all these problems for my family. You've caused the death of my sister. You have caused the suffering of my father and my brother-in-law and my niece and myself and my kingdom. And I'm finally here to stand up to you and all of that stuff. During this time frame, Rebecca shows up. Dofi takes control of Rebecca, holds Viola basically prisoner with his string powers, and makes it that, Rebecca is going to attack Viola. And thankfully, at the last minute, Luffy wakes up, gets his strength back, and, at the last second, Law switches Luffy for Viola. Rebecca hits Luffy. Luffy is fine. Law warps Rebecca out of there, so I guess the strings to Dofi are severed in that regard. And Luffy manages to finally gather up his King Kong gun power, and in, one final attack against Dofi, Dofi also manages to use his awakening power here and everything like that. And shows all that stuff. So he's, trying to, fight against Luffy in that regard. But Luffy gathers up his power, does one final attack against Dofi. That's the King Kong gun, and punches Dofi right in the face and manages to defeat Dofi, knock him out, and the birdcage dissipates. And anybody else that is being affected by the parasite thread, that just stops. So all of that's done with, and Dofi managed to do a lot of damage to the island, both to its people and to the, infrastructure of the island and the island itself, with everything that was going on with the birdcage. So Dofi's literally like, well, if I can't have it, no one can moment. And everything that happens there. So Dofi gets knocked out by Luffy. He is defeated, and, his reign of terror comes to an end. The reign of terror over Dressrosa finally comes to the end. Eventually, he is, of course, locked up in the Sea Prism shackles, and eventually is hauled away from Dressrosa on one of the marine ships to impel down. where he ends up, or on the way to Impel Down, is where he ends up taunting Suru. And who, of course, has been chasing Dofi for the past, over a decade and everything like that. So they have that type of a relationship. As I don't know if I quite stated that. I probably stated that in the previous video. They have a similar relationship to the fact that, like, Roger or Garp kept chasing Roger. Suru kept chasing Doflamingo, but Suru knows that Doflamingo is actually a bad person as opposed to Roger, who Garp knew wasn't necessarily a bad person. He was just something Roger wanted to fight against, or that Garp wanted to fight against. So on the way to Impel Down, Dofi basically taunts Suru, and he's just like, the consequences of defeating me are just going to cause more problems in the world, which, of course, that is what it leads to, because later on when we get to the Reverie arc, we have it that well, one of the things that we end up getting that's a kind of an interesting thing is that Suru is just like, yeah, well, say what you want, you still lost. You lost to Monkey D. Luffy, and you have now been dethroned, and you're no longer a warlord, you're no longer a king, you're a captive. The majority of your family has been captive and are going to be all taken to Impel Down and everything like that. And she's like, well, Whitebeard ruled in front of the throne of the Pirate King instead of claiming it out of respect for Roger 25 years ago. Dofi is now just like, I'm just going to watch the world devolve into chaos. And, like, my one request for while I'm here, okay, 2 requests. I want my glasses back. Can I have those back? Sue, fine. I will have new glasses made for you. Fine, you can have your glasses back. Suru is what Suru gets, and is like that. And he's like, the other thing is, I want a newspaper. I want newspapers when they come out, which Dofi ends up getting because we see later on he's reading the newspaper a lot in Impel Down. And then we kind of get to the last 2 bits. So we know that Jack the Drought goes and tries to free Dofi. Doesn't end up happening. He ends up fighting the Marines, loses, goes back, gets defeated by a bigger elephant. All of that stuff happens. Dofi is eventually successfully delivered to Impel Down, where he is incarcerated in level 6. She originally did not give him the newspaper, but eventually he does manage to get a hold of the newspaper because he ends up finding out a lot of different information. And the next time we see him is during the Reverie arc, because, well, so much stuff is happening up at Marijois. Dofi is just kind of laying there on the ground, attached to the chains, chained to the floor. And he's just, like, talking to Magellan, who's, like, the only person down there with him, I guess, because, well, I don't know who else would be in Impel Down in level 6 at this point in time, because most of them managed to escape with Blackbeard 2 years ago. So there's that. So, Magellan's down there, and Dofi's just like, so are you down here to protect me because someone's gonna come here and try to kill me, Magellan? Is that why you're here? And Magellan is just like, I am ignoring you, like sitting there reading the paper. Dofi is just kind of like laughing at this anyway and everything like that. So Dofi's just very entertained by what's going on, and eventually Dofi does manage to obtain a newspaper, because during the Wano arc, at the end of the arc or so, when we're getting some more updates on what's going on in the world, we see him sitting there just like reading the newspaper and just delighted at what is going on, because he is just finding this hilarious, the fact that, like, I don't remember exactly how this lands for, like, him reading the newspaper, but, like, I'm assuming he finds out that, like, Kaido and Big Mom were dethroned and defeated in Wano, that Luffy caused so much damage at, like, Totland, a couple of weeks prior, and then, all this is happening in Wano, and, like, two emperors have been defeated, and now Luffy is responsible for defeating not just 3 warlords of the sea, but 2 emperors of the sea. Luffy is tied to both of their defeats in this regard, and Dofi is just like sitting there finding this so hilarious and so amusing and entertaining through all of this, as he's reading what's going on with Luffy's new exploits. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens next with Dofi. I know that there's so many people that want there to be, like, another Impel Down breakout, that, like, something else happens in Impel Down, that they manage to escape, and Dofi manages to escape and either make his way to maybe the Cross Guild, because he's like, well, maybe I can maybe I can intimidate the clown, because Dofi would be definitely smart enough to figure out that Boogie is an idiot and that Crocodile and Mihawk are the ones that are actually behind the Cross Guild. So maybe he'd go there. But if Dofi managed to escape, he would definitely do everything in his power to try to get as much of his crew out of Impel Down as he could. You know, any of the ones that are still alive and everything like that, because he does genuinely care about his crew. As long as they don't betray him, he cares about them. So, you know, and we kind of see that throughout the course of, like, the arc and everything like that. But, like, yeah, so I know a lot of people want that to happen. I know that a lot of people want Dofi to somehow show up at, like, the final battle, whatever that ends up being, at Laugh-Tale or at Marie-Joie or Marineford, or, you know, wherever the final battle ends up being. A lot of people want Dofi to show up there. First, he has to manage to escape out of the impenetrable prison that was, you know, managed to be escaped out of 2 years prior, as a huge jailbreak. So that's why a lot of people want, like, there to be, like, a second jailbreak out of Impel Down. Either it's, you know, Bon Clay manages to lead the Okama out of there from New Kama Land and level 5.5 and out through the prison again, and they manage to escape that way. That's a possibility, or maybe there's some other things that'll end up happening. I really don't know. I mean, I don't have a problem if Oda finds a way to bring Doflamingo back in a meaningful way as to, like, why he needs to be here to see this. But there is also the whole thing of, like, what is it that he knows about? Does he know about the giant straw hat? Does he know about Eam? Does he know about other secrets that the world government, that specifically the Gorosei and Eam, don't want the rest of the world to know about? So there's that. There's the, you know, the S Flamingo that's running around now as a Seraphim. So that's there. So there's a bunch of that stuff going on. But it'll be very interesting to see what Oda ends up doing with Doflamingo next. However that ends up playing out, I don't know. We'll end up having to find out. But this video is already quite long, and I still have to edit it. So that's what I have. The next one in this series will be me going over Rebecca, from the Riku family, as kind of going from, like, all the Riku family and then into Dofi, and then kind of, like, going into Rebecca as just, like, hope for the future of Dressrosa. And then I'll do Moncherie and her father for the Tontada Kingdom, and then I'll go from there, because then after that it gets into, like, so many other different things that we are introduced to in regards to other kingdoms and royals and stuff like that in the One Piece story. And then eventually it will go into Wano, and then from there, and, you know, Totland and all of that stuff, because Big Mom is a queen, so, you know, talk about Totland at some point in time in that regard. But that's what I have there for Doflamingo. I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye!